Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to Barnaby Martin, whose new novel is inspired by his love of science and music. We talk about how lightly you need to tread with your influences. Also about why, when having a lot of ideas, the worry is getting things done.
And I have this sort of slight, it's a little bit of an anxiety that's always existed in me, that I might lose an idea if I don't put it down. I don't know where this comes from. I don't know if other authors or creative people experience this. But when you have an idea, it's not that I fear that other people are going to take that idea or write the idea instead, because that just will never happen with a novel. Even if you write something in a similar vein, no one is going to produce exactly the same novel as you. But I have this it's like an energy to get something down reasonably quickly, and then I can sort of sort it out afterwards.
And you can hear why he was surprised to find out that, unlike writing music, writing novels, it's all about the edit.
And actually, I had to learn that for my first book. I was really surprised by how long we spent editing the book. So I worked with my agent on the novel, and we spent about 6 months editing. And I never anticipated it would be that much. And people always say you find the book in the edit, and it is true. You know, not necessarily the content, but you find the spirit of the book. You find the flow of the book much more than you do in music. I think music is much more, you plan, you feel your way through the piece, and then it's sort of done because it was a single expression, and you're like, okay, there we go, that's what I felt.
It's all on the way with Barnaby Martin chatting about his new novel, The Quiet. Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. My name is Dan. This is the show where we take a look inside an author's working day. I was pleasantly surprised to see the other day the podcast got a recommendation, a shout out in, I think, The Guardian's culture column on one of the Saturdays just gone, which is obviously fantastic. If you have found us because of that, brilliant, love it, thank you for being there. It always strikes me as really funny that you're never told about these things. You just buy papers willy-nilly on the hoof, and they might be in there. Or your mate WhatsApps you a picture. Oh, I saw this podcast in there. Well done. This sounds like yours. Yes, it is mine. Thank you very much. So if you found us, thank you very much. It just always makes me laugh that way. Now, this week, we're looking through the working day of Barnaby Martin, who does a bit of everything, does Barnaby, an award-winning composer whose pieces have been performed across the world. Also, he runs a YouTube channel called Listening In, where 200,000 subscribers have watched him explore different ideas in music. They've done that over 10 million times. He also teaches science in a school. So there's a lot going on, and it's all come together, really, in a brand new novel. And the book came from being asked to write a non-fiction book, tying in with the YouTube channel's success, really. But instead of doing that, Barnaby thought, hang on, I've got this other idea that suddenly popped up, and I can't get it out of my mind. Can I try and tackle that instead? It's called The Quiet. It's all about the world being covered by the Soundfield, which changes every aspect of people's lives. It brings deadly heat, it dries up food and water, and everyone lives in the constant hum of the Soundfield in the background. And now scientist Hannah has to keep her gifted son Isaac safe in a world where the Soundfield and the people there want to silence him. So as you can maybe tell, it's sci-fi, it's dystopian, it's full of music and the theory of it. It ties together a lot of Barnaby's passions. And I think you'll really enjoy in the conversation trying to figure out how he pulled those together, leaping from one idea to another, and how these things blend into the novel that you can get now. You can hear about the quest to make things always feel new and exciting. Also why his creativity lends itself to other projects, what he makes of that, and how he divides his time across all different outlets and makes sure he still has the energy to put into everything that he loves. Now, if you like the sound, of The Quiet, you can get a copy. Use the link in the episode notes that will take you through to our bookshop.org shopfront that we've got there. And by doing it on that, it's a little bit pricier, only a touch, but some goes through to Barnaby, to the podcast, and your local independent bookshop. So I would really appreciate it if you got your books over there. Let's jump into it then with Barnaby Martin, and we start as we always do with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
So I'm currently in my living room, and I have a nice view of the River Thames in front of me and sort of the nice greenery of Barnes. It's very nice sunny day today, and this is where I sit and I write every day. So I live here with my husband, and we have a sort of study, which he has because he's preparing to be a lawyer at the moment, and I take the living room to do my writing.
Wonderful. So that's where you are. You're in your front room. You're looking out over this glorious vista of the river, but it's a living room, right? So that's the space where you and your husband unwind, where you watch telly, where you live. What have you got around you that reminds you of the times you're there to write and what you should be working on?
So I have a lot of books in here. We've got a huge bookcase, and if I need some inspiration, I might go and find something from there. I've also got sort of nice plants and things to make sure it's a sort of a nice space. But it's the one thing I don't really have is a space for myself. But actually, I don't really mind that. I can write anywhere. I find that I can pick it up either in a coffee shop or at work. I don't really need to have a very specific environment where I need to write, which I think just makes things a lot easier.
So what is it you do need with you? Is it just you and the laptop?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mostly write in Microsoft Word, but I also use Notion. I don't know if you've come across the app Notion. But it's a free app for students and for teachers, and I really love writing in there. Actually, it's become for my second book, I've been writing it in Notion, and it's just completely changed it. It's a database app really, but like Scrivener in that way. But I think it's much more user friendly than Scrivener. So I can arrange different chapters, I can reorganize things, I can write detailed notes, and I do all of my research in there as well. So it's mostly like a digital space that I'm finding. And if I've got that digital space, which is I can access anywhere, then I can get into the mood for writing.
That's interesting. I did used to use Notion, but that was more of a day-to-day planner where I would use it almost as a remote pin board. So what do you like about it that means you are writing novels there?
So I quite like it because I get ideas all the time. And the ability just to whip out my phone and write something, either an idea or a thought, or actually just read through a little bit of prose that I've written and edit something on the go. I really like that. So I might be out for a walk. So I walk around Barnes, and there's just lovely places around here. I've got Richmond Park. I've got Barnes Pond. I've got all the way up the river and the towpath. So I sort of often get out my phone and just write an idea down. And it's just flexible. It just allows me to be really flexible with my writing. For other novels, I might not use Notion. I think what's important for me is to find a sort of fresh way of approaching it every single time so that it feels new and exciting, even if it is just basically the same thing.
How do you deal with the fear that we all have of keeping anything digitally, that one day it might just vanish in a puff of smoke?
Yeah, I definitely have nightmares about this. So I copy and paste a lot of what I do into Word. So I've got a backup ready to go. And as quickly as I can, I print the book, so I have a physical copy. Even if I'm not editing on the physical copy, I just have it there, just in case.
So we get quite niche and nerdy, and you've taken us through some of the specifics. What font opinions do you have, Barnaby? do you even have that choice thoroughly on Notion?
On Notion, there are three. There's like a mono, there's the standard one, and there's a serif one. For the book, I've chosen the serif font, which is fine. In Microsoft Word, I do like to write in a serif font because I just think it looks nice. So I think I'm using Book Antica at the moment. That's the one I'm typesetting my second book in. Yeah, Book Antica.
Now, just like a brief skim through your experience so far instantly points out you're a creative chap, an award-winning composer. You do the YouTube as well, to some success as also. How much do you think that lends itself to the fact that you can write anywhere, that this is not the be-all and end-all, that you need a specific place where you sit down and your writing office, but you everything kind of lends you to write on the go?
Oh, completely. They're definitely connected. I think originally I was just planning on being a composer. So for about a decade, I tried to make it in the world of music. It's a really hard world to get into, and you have to do a lot and be sort of available and do a lot of networking. But after I stopped writing, I do a little bit of writing now, but much less than I used to. And I started YouTube. I realized that actually it was just about creativity and pushing my creativity in different directions. And it made me much less precious about it. I think when I was composing, I was definitely more precious. I had to have my space. I had to, because I was actually handwriting all of my music. So it was like, like composers from 400 years ago. And so I had to have my desk and my A3 manuscript paper, and I was doing all that. It was really precious. But then when I started YouTube, I was like, okay, I can do this anywhere. It doesn't matter. I can be creative anywhere. And that's gone into my writing as well, my novel writing, that I feel like if I have an idea, I can just write wherever, and I don't need to have a specific like cup of coffee, and I don't need to be listening to music. I don't need to be in a specific place. And I think often people think that writing is hard because you need to have all of that in place, but you just don't. You can do it anywhere. And actually removing that romantic sort of notion that you have to be some tortured artist sitting in your private study. I just don't like that. So I like to do it wherever I can.
A slight sidebar. The thing with being an author is, although it is tremendously difficult, the path to at least publication is quite apparent, right? You write a thing, you send it off to an agent, usually, hopefully they'll say yes, and then they'll pitch out to publishers. Like, that seems quite a linear pattern. I wouldn't have a clue how you get something that you've composed, music, played. Just give us a brief snapshot of how that seemingly is done.
Yeah, it's a pretty random process because it can happen in many, many different ways. It could be the traditional way of going directly to a publisher. You don't really have agents in the world of music, so you would go direct to a publisher, and they might put you in touch with an orchestra or a performer. But more often than not, it's the composer talking directly to the performer, and usually either the performer, whether it's like an orchestra or a chamber group, have commissioned the composer to write a piece of music, and so that is then put on. Or alternatively, it's a composer reaching out to a player saying, I want to write you a piece, and they say yes, and then you work together. Alternatively, it could be, just the composer paying for people to come along and play their music, or entering competitions, or entering residencies. So there are loads of different paths to have your music performed. But so much of it was driven by the composer. They had to organize it themselves. Especially in the early days, you're having to book all the players, you're having to get the funding, you're having to put on the concert. You have to be really scrappy. And in some respects that sort of put me off, because I like being scrappy, but only to a point.
I've mentioned that you seem quite a creative fellow, and you're busy. So you do the schooling, the teaching, that's the official word for that. There is, I guess, probably a bit of composing here and there. You do the YouTube as well, and now you're writing a book. So the show is Writer's Routine, Barnaby. Just take us through a day in the life of you writing your novel around everything else that's going on. How does it look?
Yeah, so if it's in school time, if I'm teaching, then focus obviously on the teaching from 8:30 to 4:15, and then I'm coming back, and usually I sort of unwind a little bit, and then I sit down in the living room, get my computer out, and then I try and write for 2 to 3 hours every evening, write or edit. And then at the weekend or the holidays, it can be much more structured. So I get up, have breakfast. I might go for a walk beforehand, and then I usually write from, if I have a whole day, just in the morning. I find that I actually have a limited amount of space for creativity, or sort of energy for creativity in a day. I read once that Ishiguro wrote The Remains of the Day in like a 4 or 6 week period, and he just wrote non-stop for the whole day. And I just have no idea how you can do that, because I think past a point, I'm not coming up with good ideas anymore, and I need to leave it. So the morning will be dedicated to writing, maybe the afternoon to admin or to some light editing.
Oh, really? So it's quite interesting how you've blocked that out. When you have got a holiday off school, so you know that this is the time where you are properly needing to write, it's interesting because there's only so much creativity you can do in a day, as you've said, but yet you know that you only have these precious windows of time where you can create and not be at school. How do you deal with the pressure of wanting to get something done but perhaps not being able to?
It's hard because I know that I have limited amounts of time, but I also know that if I pressure myself, I'm just not going to produce good work. So I I just say to myself, okay, well, it's better to write, good work for 3 or 4 hours a day than sort of subpar work for 7 hours a day. So, and I tend to work quite quickly as well, so it doesn't really bother me that a huge amount. So, for example, The Quiet, my debut novel, I wrote in just under 4 months. So I did the research. Research took me about sort of 6 months, and then I was writing the first draft in just under 4 months. So I can work reasonably quickly, and that's around a teaching job. The editing took a little bit longer than that, but I find it's okay, and I don't want to pressure myself because I want to take my time. I want to make sure the ideas are good.
So if you know that you do have these little windows where you are able to work, be that around school time or during the holidays, is there anything that you do to really get cracking, to kind of make it more conducive to creativity?
Just get some sleep, I suppose. There's nothing. I'm really driven when I want to make something. I just sort of do it, and I have this sort of slight. It's a little bit of an anxiety that's always existed in me, that I might lose an idea if I don't put it down. I don't know where this comes from. I don't know if other authors or creative people experience this, but when you have an idea, it's not that I fear that other people are going to take that idea or write the idea instead, because that just will never happen with a novel. Even if you write something in a similar vein, no one is going to produce exactly the same novel as you. But I have this, it's like an energy to get something down reasonably quickly, and then I can sort of sort it out afterwards. So when I put down that first draft, or when I'm writing something, I'm not editing as I'm going. I'm just writing sort of consistently, trying to let it flow, and then I can go back to it afterwards and sort it out. I'm definitely not the sort of person who would spend 5 years writing a novel. I think not least because I'd get quite bored of the idea. I don't know how people can do it. Like, think of Donna Tartt, he spends a decade writing a novel. I just don't. Why do you want to do something else? Like, there's so many other things you could explore. So I'd much rather work quickly, and that is quite conducive to my life, because I'm, as a teacher, you have to work very quickly. It's a very intense, sort of fast-paced environment, and that gives me energy in a weird way. It also, takes it. Obviously, it's a very tiring job, but it also gives me a lot of energy, and I can use that in my work because I'm sort of trying to fit work in, and I actually write better in some respects in term time than holiday.
What's the aim for these moments where you know that you're feeling creative enough to write? Are you going by word count? Is it a point of the story?
I go until I can't go anymore. So it might be 2,000 words. It might be, 500 words. And actually, I would much rather do a sort of little and often approach. And I think this is connected to just writing in the morning and not writing in the afternoon. If I get something done every single day, then by the end of 6 months, maybe less, you've written a novel. Because if you write, let's say, 500 to 1,000 words a day, even if they're bad words, you're going to have a novel by the end of a reasonably short period of time. And there may be days where I write 2,000 words, but again, it's just guided by my energy, how I'm feeling on any particular day.
And well, there's so much else that goes into it as well. I mean, you've got a YouTube channel, and I mentioned that there's some success there, with 200,000 odd subscribers, 10 million plus views. So there is an audience there that are keen for you, and you'll be making money off YouTube. Let's be honest, probably not loads, but you'll be making cash off YouTube. So and it's another creative outlet for you. So how are you factoring in that element of what you want to do around teaching and now writing?
So the YouTube channel was really big for me from 2019 to 2023. So when I started working on my first novel, the YouTube channel definitely took a back seat. And I think I would be the first to admit that I can't do everything. Like, I can't have a full-time teaching job and also write a novel and also have a full-time sort of YouTube channel. But actually recently I've made about, I think it's 7 videos, something like that. I mean, partly it was to publicize the book because it seemed to connect really well, but also because I missed it. I missed making YouTube videos. I find that if I'm working on a YouTube video, I can't really be writing a novel at the same time. I'm quite sort of, with my creative life, I have to be working on one thing at a time. I'm sort of quite jealous of people who can work on multiple creative things simultaneously. I can't really do that. So if there's like a pause in book writing, so when I'm, it's with the publishers or nothing is really happening, then I can make a YouTube video. And similarly, when I'm writing a book, I can't really think about YouTube because it's a sort of same part of my brain that's being occupied. So I do have to compartmentalize them. But I love it. I love making YouTube videos. I hopefully will make more of them in the future as well, as I come up with ideas. But yeah, it's not something that I'm looking to make a career in any way, because it's just for fun, really. But I really love it.
Why feel the need to write a book when you've got this little YouTube hustle going on at the same time? What was it like? If you've only got so much, you've said you've only got so much creative focus, right? You're not someone who can kind of spread yourself quite thinly over a lot of different projects. Why make the move to this new thing? Are you just someone like myself, by the way, who kind of has shiny new idea syndrome?
I definitely have shiny new idea syndrome. Yeah, I do have that. But I think the YouTube channel is great because it's nonfiction, it's analysis of film music and classical music. And I love that. But equally, it's not me. It's very creative, obviously, because you're doing a lot of creative stuff in the video editing and in actually writing the nonfiction essays, the sort of creative nonfiction. But it's not completely creative. I'm not making a new world. And so I think that the draw of writing novels is that I'm entirely in control of this world. It's entirely creative. Yeah, there's a lot of sort of nonfiction in it because you can sort of draw on research, especially for The Quiet. There's a lot of research that went into that. And I drew on the research that I was doing actually for a nonfiction proposal in order to write the book. But it's so unbelievably freeing and creative in a way that YouTube isn't necessarily all the time. And also, part of the problem with YouTube is that the algorithm expects a certain thing. So I took a break of about 2 years and have returned, and my views have been a lot lower, which is fine. It doesn't really bother me that much. But you have to make a certain type of video in order to be really successful. With books, I feel I can be just much freer, and I can explore things that I'm really interested in and write books in different genres and different styles. And that's going to be my aim for other books. I'm not going to just write another book like The Quiet. I'm going to keep exploring the books that I love and the types of worlds that I love. So I think it's a level of freedom and creativity.
How clearly do you remember a moment where you thought, again, away from the plot at this point, but where you thought, oh, I'm going to give novel writing a go. Like, I'm bored of making the videos. The composing hasn't turned out exactly how I thought it would. What do you remember about that moment where you thought, oh, here's a left turn that maybe we could take?
So it was actually, there was a moment I was walking with one of my colleagues from school, and I was talking to him about this nonfiction book, because that's how it all happened. I was approached by an agent, Jack Fogg, who's my current agent, to write a nonfiction book based on my YouTube channel. So it was going to sort of tie in nicely. And I was putting that together, and I was talking to my colleague about this. I was going for a walk and having a coffee with him. And then I said, but I've got this idea for a novel. And I feel like I really, really want to write that instead. And I was sort of talking to him about the process of how I would basically turn down a nonfiction proposal that I was putting together and try and convince my agent to write a novel instead. But it was just such a strong feeling that instead of doing the nonfiction, I had to go in this other direction and write a novel. I honestly don't. I never even considered writing a book before, let alone a novel. I love reading, and I've always loved reading. Although I really actually only came to it post-teenage years. I should have read more when I was a teenager. But I just had this pull. I don't know where it came from. And I just had to write it.
Now, through over 300 interviews with authors like yourself about how they do it, there is a consistency in that they'll have an initial idea of what they want. Normally, maybe a beginning, a middle, and then they'll sit down in front of their computer and start typing away and force it out, hope that something comes. Now, when you're composing music, how similar is that? I guess the process of the whole thing. Is it just that you can sit there with some sheet music and feel it out in the moment? You decide, I want to write a piece right now. Let's see where it takes me. Is it a bit more ephemeral than that?
It's actually surprisingly similar to writing a novel. How I write a novel anyway, which is to plan and outline a lot. So for my first book and for the second book, I've done a significant amount of research and outlining. I mean, there's not really research you can do for writing a piece of music, but you can definitely plan it because, let's say I wrote a piece called Quanta, which was for large orchestra, which is about 17 minutes long, roughly. And there was a lot of ideas of quantum mechanics that went into there. There are other pieces that inspired it as well. So you've got to decide things like, what instruments you're going to use, what sort of tone you're going to have, what ideas you're going to explore, sort of programmatic ideas in the music. And a lot of composers do it that way. They have a plan for how the piece is going to go. And actually, I had things like I drew little sketches, and other composers do this too, where you're sort of drawing lines and diagrams and shapes and things in order to try and visually represent what the music is going to sound like. So when you're sitting down, you're like, okay, well, I've got where the music has been, because you're probably, let's say you're halfway through a piece, you're actually picking it up because it takes so long to do. And you're like, okay, you reread what you've just done in your head, and then you decide, okay, well, where's this going? What sort of emotion am I looking for? Am I going to be reaching a climax at any point? Is this going to stop at any point? Or am I just continuing with the same thing? So there's definitely a huge element of feeling it, and you work with what you're doing. So maybe you write a little line and that inspires something else, and then you keep going with that. But there's also a significant amount of planning. So I would say it's much closer to writing a novel than you probably imagine.
What about the aftertouches of it? So again, one thing that you learn quite quickly when you're writing is that it's all in the rewriting, it's in the editing, it's in trimming it down. When you're writing a 17-minute long piece of music, what trimming down is necessary there, or is it kind of all in a flow?
It's to be honest, it's significantly less. I don't know what other people do, but I hardly edited my music. I used to then put it into this electronic music program called Sibelius. And so there would be some editing there, and it would be a lot of typesetting. So the way that the score is organized on the page, so putting in dynamics and things like that, and articulation markings and conductors markings and tempos and things. But with a book, it's all, you spend longer editing it than you do writing it. It's very different than that. And actually, I had to learn that for my first book. I was really surprised by how long we spent editing the book. So I worked with my agent on the novel, and we spent about 6 months editing. And I never anticipated it would be that much. And people always say you find the book in the edit, and it is true. Not necessarily the content, but you find the spirit of the book. You find the flow of the book much more than you do in music. I think music is much more you plan, you feel your way through the piece, and then it's sort of done because it was a single expression, and you're like, okay, there we go, that's what I felt. Because it's abstract, there's nothing to say that part is wrong unless it's impossible to play. Whereas if you look at a book and there's a paragraph which contradicts a paragraph in 3 chapters time, then you go, okay, well, clearly this has to be changed. That is objectively wrong. Whereas there's no objective right or wrong in music.
You describe it very well. How crystallized were these thoughts when you were in between composing and writing fiction? So how much did one influence the other knowingly?
I don't think there was any knowing link to them. And obviously The Quiet has a lot of music in it, and a huge part of me has gone into the book, both with me as a scientist, as a chemistry teacher, but also as a musician, as a composer. But there was no specific thought that I said, okay, now I'm going to try and use what I've learned in order to transfer into writing a book. In terms of how I was actually creating it, I think I was much more inspired by the work I'd done for YouTube and writing the nonfiction essays, where the process of editing, for example, I reading aloud when I edit my words to try and get the flow of them. That's something that Margaret Atwood has said as well. She reads everything aloud to make sure that because actually that really just helps how it reads if you're not reading it aloud. I think that inspired it much more than I would say my music. My music is in there. I'm sure, but I can't. There was no sort of specific direct link between the two.
Back with Barnaby, talking more about The Quiet in just a second. Now, if you're enjoying the show and you'd like to support us in any way, There's a few chances for you to do that. If you'd like to become a rolling backer, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/writers routine, just for a few dollars and pounds a month. It helps me keep bringing you these chats with the best authors around. On there is merch, there is bonus content, there's a way for your book to sponsor the show, and you'll get access to the little writing community that we've got, and we share ideas every now and then. Also, maybe becoming a rolling monthly backer isn't the right fit for you. Absolutely fine. If you'd still like to support the show, you can make a one-off tip, a donation, whatever you fancy. Send it over to ko-fi.com/writers routine. It comes to me. It helps me keep bringing you these shows as often as I can. For links to both of those ways you can support the show, have a look in the episode notes wherever you're listening. Let's get back to it then with Barnaby Martin, Renaissance man, multi-hyphener, I think is what we call them now. Does all sorts of teaching, sciencing, composing, and writing. His new novel is The Quiet. It's all about a world trapped beneath the Soundfield. We talk about the questions that you need to ask yourself when you get an initial brilliant hook of an idea. What happens next? How do you mind map and plan everything out? Also, we discuss how lightly you should show your influences. And we get back to it, talking more about the very first idea for The Quiet, and why it all came from the non-fiction book he was approached to write.
You have to understand what my non-fiction book was about in order to understand The Quiet. It was going to be about the development of music throughout our life and how music sort of plays a part in sort of rituals and rites of passage throughout life. So I was going to look at a child going from basically a fetus up to death and seeing where music plays a part and how we sort of sing to our children when we're young. We listen to music when we break up with our girlfriends and boyfriends. We listen to music when we get, have grief, or we get married, or all sorts of things. Music is always there, and it was going to be this sort of exploration of a life through music. And I did loads of research on neurobiology of music, on the evolution of music, and it was that really led to The Quiet. So I read a book called The Singing Neanderthals by Stephen Mithen, and he was talking about how music evolved, or a theory about how music evolved from this thing called a musical proto-language, which split into what we know now as spoken language and music. And I just love this idea that originally we sort of had this much more musical way of communicating. This is about 30,000 years ago. Way before spoken language existed. I just thought, well, isn't that a great idea for a novel? And I think it was almost like the day after I'd finished reading that book, this idea of the Soundfield came to me. So I thought, imagine this huge spherical field covering the Earth. And I've actually still got my notebook where I just drew a little circle of the Earth, and then I drew another circle around it for the Soundfield. And I imagine the Soundfield producing this proto-language, this language that existed before we had the schism between music and spoken language. And I just thought, what a cool idea for a novel. I didn't know what it was, or what it was going to do, or who the characters were. It was just that. It was just this idea for this field surrounding the Earth. And I was like, what happens next? I want to know. And that's where it came from.
Well, in a very simplistic, open way, how do you discover what happens next? You've already said that you're quite a thorough plotter and planner. When you have this idea of a sound field, but you need a plot, you need characters to really drive this thing along because you've decided to write fiction. How are you discovering these things? So
the first thing I asked myself was, well, what impact would it have on the world? Because then I could think about what would happen to the characters. So I imagined it accelerating climate change and causing a huge refugee crisis from the southern hemisphere because everything heated up, and also maybe UV radiation being really high. Because it was effectively had a scientific impact on the world. It was a climate crisis accelerated. My first thought was that the protagonist had to be a scientist, and that's where Hannah came from. She had to be a scientist because I wanted her involved in the early days of the crisis and doing research on the Soundfield, and her discoveries having some impact on the world. And I sort of explored all these ideas inspired by things like Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, which of course is based on Ted Chiang's Story of Your Life. I looked at quite hard sci-fi, so I was thinking about things like Interstellar and what Interstellar did. But as soon as I found or thought about the fact that that Hannah had to have a son, and Isaac came into the picture, after that point, all the sort of hard sci-fi went away and actually focused in on Hannah as the protagonist and her son Isaac. And I had a look at things like The Road and Station 11 as sort of inspiration for softer sci-fi, and focusing much more on the core relationship between Hannah and her son. And so that's really when the whole book was unlocked for me. When I found that central relationship, when I found that mother-son relationship, the sci-fi is there and is there still. It's much softer than it was, but that's when I found the novel as Hannah and Isaac.
Through everything that you say, you can hear the influences. I mean, you mentioned earlier with your music being influenced by kind of quantum mechanics and physics, and I know that you studied science, and now you work as a teacher, and you've been influenced by all these films, and there's stuff that you want to say. How tricky was it to not wear those influences heavily and to lightly let a reader know the themes that you're touching upon?
Yeah, it's something that I think I was very conscious of early on, because it's so easy just to go, okay, I want to write my version of this thing that I love. But actually, I think it was just time. So the earlier versions of the story were sort of like Arrival Mark II. So it was much more about the sort of mystery of the Soundfield and trying to solve the Soundfield, a classic sort of arrival story, an alien arrival story, but with this enormous field. And it just wasn't particularly that interesting. So I just spent weeks and weeks and weeks thinking about the story, reworking it, writing notes. I have several notebooks full of random scribblings and different directions that the story might have gone in. And I think I was also trying things out. So I wrote various passages of this more hard sci-fi version of the story. And I think I was conscious of the fact that it was too similar to the things that I liked and the things I was influenced by, because no one really wants to read a slightly worse version of a thing that already exists. So it was just time. It was time and being very conscious of not being inspired by, but not directly pulling from the things that I love.
And while we're talking about plotting and planning, how much did you know about the entire thing before you sat down to write the first sentence?
So I had about 10,000 words of an outline. So a pretty detailed understanding of the world and what was going to happen. And it definitely changed. And that whole thing about the characters just doing something that the author didn't expect, that is definitely true. Hannah was going off and doing things that I had no intention of her doing, because it just felt right in the story. And I followed her, and I let her sort of guide the story, and I let her relationship with Isaac guide the story as well. But there was all of the beats were there, all of the major twists and revelations and discoveries. The structure was all there, and I was just sort of filling in the gaps, but then allowing it to develop in a way that felt natural.
And we've spoken about how it's not there are touches of sci-fi here, but in writing the novel and actually pacing it out and figuring out what word is appropriate, how much were you thinking about the genre that this would be placed in and the tropes that come with that?
In honesty, not at all, really, because the tropes of sci-fi is difficult, because I was just trying to tell the story, really, and I was trying to tell the story in the clearest way possible. So when I'm thinking about the science and the way that the science is talked about, the tropes of sci-fi, to be honest, are quite badly explained science. I mean, a lot of sci-fi just has very wishy-washy science that's fine, and it sort of works with the story, and you accept it's part of the world, and there's not real truth in anything. But my approach was, I want to get the science as correct as possible. There was definitely a narrative leap that I had to take at some point when I was thinking about the Soundfield and how exactly it worked. But everything else in the book, all the science, I wanted to make sure was correct. And if someone was going to pick it up as a scientist, as a geneticist, a biologist, or a musicologist, they would pick it up and go, okay, this feels good. This feels correct. And I was inspired by Ted Chiang for that. Also Margaret Atwood as well. When she talks about science, she has a sort of, I think her father was a biologist. And she talks about the sort of accuracy that she wants in her books when she's talking about history or science. So I wasn't really thinking about the tropes. if anything, I wanted to sort of avoid them. I don't know if I have avoided the tropes of science fiction, but I wasn't thinking about genre. I was just thinking about telling a story in the truest and clearest way possible.
And away from all of that, you've said that it was when you started to learn more about the characters, about Isaac and Hannah, that you really were drawn into the tale. What were you doing to know them thoroughly enough to tell their story? You mentioned when you were composing, you would draw diagrams. What were you doing to know your characters?
So I did the sort of classic thing of writing bios for them, but I didn't particularly find that helpful. I actually just found, seems slightly strange, but writing the story helped me know the characters. And the early version of the draft, the first draft of the book, Hannah was much more introspective. She spoke a lot more internally, and there was a lot more internal monologuing going on, which was eventually removed, and it was to make the first part sort of cleaner in many respects. But just by writing them and writing their relationship, I got to know them. Hannah is quite like me in many respects. She's a scientist and a musician. She's quite impatient, which I'm quite impatient. That sort of goes part and sort of I want to write fast because I'm a little bit impatient. She's certainly a little bit ruder and a bit more sort of self-interested than I am, or that I hope I am anyway. But by writing their relationship, I found them. Isaac was also inspired. I've got 4 nieces and nephews who are one of whom, Sebastian, is about Isaac's age, around 6 years old. So I did sort of spend some time thinking about him and thinking about how he acted. He's quite precocious, like Isaac is. So I was definitely inspired by sort of my interaction with nieces and nephews to get that.
And you've said that you're working on your second. So, and it's very apparent that you are someone who is quite accurate at analysing the way that you work with some clarity. So what have you learned about the way that you work, the way that you write novels best, that you've taken through as you work on your second?
So I think the main thing is that level of planning and research. I spent 6 months researching The Quiet, and I've spent about the same amount of time doing research for the second book. The second book, there isn't as it's not as obvious what the research would necessarily be, but there are lots of things you can read to sort of help you understand the world without sort of giving away what the second book is going to be about, or even if it's going to be a sequel to The Quiet. But I've just spending that time thinking about it and finding the relationships and finding the characters. Ishiguro says this thing about testing out the relationships, and I've done that in the second book as well, writing little dialogue exchanges, trying to find the characters through the way that they talk to each other, just spending time researching random things that might be tangentially connected to the story and the characters. Even if you're not thinking about the story, doing reading that is sort of vaguely related to it helps you think about it because it's going on in the back of your mind. And I think that time is needed. I know that when I rush into things and I'm feeling like I have to meet a deadline, or feeling like I've got to get something out, I don't produce good work. I found that with my YouTube channel, with my music as well. If I'm told I have to write something and I don't spend that time thinking about it and letting it gestate, then I produce bad work, or work, not necessarily bad work, but work that I'm not happy with. And I want every book that I write to be, the best it can possibly be. They're all going to be, I think, quite different. And I've said before that I want to explore different worlds and different genres and styles. But I think the planning, the time taken to let the story appear, that's what I've taken.
And you touch on wanting to write in different genres, which from my understanding, a lot of publishers don't really love you to do that, right? Because you have an audience who knows your name, you have a place on the bookshelf, so they're quite keen for you to, well, almost stay in your lane. If that's the case, how tricky would you find it?
Yeah, so this is a conversation that I find a really tough one. And publishers are generally more inclined for you to stay in your lane, but I think if you've only written one book, then you don't really know what lane you're in. I mean, I suppose you can put, The Quiet can put me in the sci-fi lane. It's reasonably plot driven, but it's also character driven. It wouldn't be classed as a literary novel. It would be classed more as a speculative or thriller. It would probably be easier in terms of maybe commercial success or financial success for me to keep writing a particular style of book. But I've never been interested in just doing one thing. I mean, if you look at the fact that I've written loads of music and then I went onto YouTube and now I'm writing books, that just shows you that I like to explore lots of different things. And within my music, I wasn't just writing one type of music. It was lots of different things. Within my YouTube channel, I went from analyzing Radiohead to, looking at Stravinsky, then also the Shining, and just many, many different influences, because my mind sort of works like that. I go, oh, actually, I'm really interested in this thing over here and this thing over here. And I think if my second book is sort of distinct to the first, but there's maybe a stylistic consistency, so that if you pick up my second book, you'll know it's written by me, but is in a different world and a different space, then I think what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, well, this is the point on the map that I want, and the direction I want to go in is not any particular. I'm not going to be defined by a particular genre or a particular type of book, and I'm going to explore lots of different things. And that's what my favorite writers have done. If I think about like Donna Tartt or Margaret Atwood or Ishiguro or Ian McEwan, these novelists, those are the novelists I love, and who have explored just so many different worlds and just let their interest guide them instead of being guided by what might be successful.
And that's it for this week's episode of Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Barnaby for coming on the show. The new novel is The Quiet. You can get a link to buy the book in the episode notes that will take you through to our bookshop.org storefront. I would really appreciate if you could do it over there. You could also support the show Ko-Fi and Patreon. There will be no new episode next week, so I will see you in 2 weeks for more investigations through the writing life of some of our favourite authors. Until then, thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon.